I noticed the file lists names to avoid. Let me check them and write a completely fresh story. The band names are Maya, Diane, Trevor, Priya, Cassandra Webb, Edmund, Dennis, Patricia, Lena, Colton, Serena, Owen, Claire, Ruth, Nathan, Gerald, Joanna, Marcus, Brooke, Barrett, Vanessa, Kyle, Ms. Harriet, Nora, Celia, Forrest, Solange, Aldous, Rhett, Bev, Daniel, Sylvia, Forrest, Solange, Aldous, Rhett, Bev, Daniel, Sylvia. New names I'll use: Iris, narrator, mom, Karen, Nom, dad, Jag, younger brother, Todd, not enlist, best friend, Macter, mentor, Lawrence, aunt, Nomper, and Deb. For 8 years, I thought love looked like sacrifice. I thought being a good daughter meant saying yes every single time, no matter the cost. It took one accidental voicemail to burn that belief completely to the ground. I remember the exact moment it happened. A Tuesday, late October, one of those evenings where the sky goes dark before you're ready for it, and the cold catches you off guard even though you knew it was coming. I'd just walked through the front door of my apartment in Cincinnati, 3rd floor, the one with the rattling radiator I'd been meaning to call maintenance about for 6 months. My work bag hit the floor with that heavy, satisfying thud that meant the day was finally over. I kicked off my shoes, padded to the kitchen, and noticed my phone had a voicemail notification. Area code I recognized immediately. My aunt's number. Aunt Deb never called. We texted sometimes. Birthday stuff mostly. But a voicemail was unusual. I poured myself a glass of water and pressed play, expecting maybe a reminder about Thanksgiving or some piece of family news she'd decided to relay the old-fashioned way. What I heard instead was my mother's voice. She wasn't talking to me. She didn't know I was listening. The audio was muffled at first, the sound of a phone pocket dialing into a room, but within seconds, everything cleared up with horrible precision. My mother was mid-sentence, and she was laughing, that specific laugh she only uses when she's comfortable, when she thinks no one is judging her. She wired it by Friday, I heard her say. I didn't even have to cry this time. More laughter. My father's voice, lower, saying something I couldn't quite catch. Then my brother Todd, unmistakable even through the tinny speaker. She's like a vending machine. Put in enough guilt, and the money drops. The water glass in my hand went absolutely still. I wasn't breathing. The voicemail kept going. 37 seconds of my family joking about how predictable I was, how easy I was, how my sense of obligation was the most reliable financial tool they owned. My mother called me her emergency fund. My father said, and I remember this word for word because I've replayed it so many times since, "The girl doesn't know how to say no. She never has. That's our pension plan right there." Then the recording ended. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after that, listening to the radiator knock against the wall. I'd like to say I cried immediately. I didn't. The first thing I felt wasn't grief. It was confusion. That specific disorienting confusion that comes when reality reassembles itself into a shape you don't recognize. I kept replaying the 37 seconds, kept looking for the alternate explanation, the misheard word, the joke that had a punchline I'd missed. There wasn't one. So then I sat down on the kitchen floor. And that's when I cried. I thought about the summer I was 24. I'd saved for 14 months for a trip to Portugal, my first real vacation since college, money I'd set aside in a separate account so I couldn't touch it impulsively. My mother called me in May of that year. Her voice was the particular trembling kind she'd deployed when she wanted me to know she was suffering but didn't want to burden me. The property taxes on the house were overdue. If they didn't pay by the end of the month, there would be penalties, maybe worse. She didn't ask directly, she never asked directly. She described the problem in careful, devastating detail and then said, "I don't know what we're going to do." That was all she needed to say. I canceled my trip. I transferred the money. When I told her, she said, "I knew I could count on you," and something about the relief in her voice felt, at the time, like love. It wasn't love. I understood that now, sitting on my kitchen floor. I thought about Todd and his investment opportunity 2 years ago, a food truck concept that he described with the kind of infectious enthusiasm that made you believe in it even when the business plan was written on a napkin. I gave him $4,000. When the food truck idea dissolved 3 months later, the money dissolved with it. He didn't apologize. He found a new emergency within weeks. I thought about my father showing up at the hospital where I work. I'm a nurse, nights mostly, standing in the hallway outside my unit in his good jacket like he'd dressed up for the occasion, which I later realized he had. He'd timed it for when he knew I'd be on a break. He needed money for a car repair, he said. Needed it that day. I wrote him a check at the nurse's station. My colleagues pretended not to notice. I told myself this was what families did. I told myself I was lucky to be in a position to help. 37 seconds. That's how long it took to understand that none of it had ever been what I thought it was. The hardest part about being used by people you love isn't the money. The money is concrete. You can add it up. You can name it. You can eventually stop handing it over. The hardest part is the identity crisis that comes after, because if everything they said to make you feel needed was a script, then who were you all those years you were performing your role so faithfully? I sat on my kitchen floor and could not answer that question. I genuinely didn't know who I was outside of being their safety net. I didn't call anyone that night. I went to bed at 9, stared at the ceiling until 2 in the morning, and then got up and started writing things down. Not a journal entry, a list. Every significant financial help I could remember, with dates and amounts. The roof repair fund I'd contributed to twice. The car loan I'd co-signed for Todd when he was 21, which I'd ended up paying off myself when he stopped making payments 6 months in. The medical bill assistance, the utility overdue notices, the just until Friday cash requests that never ended on Friday. My handwriting got tighter as the list got longer. By the time the sun came up, I had filled 7 pages of a legal pad and the total was somewhere north of $60,000 over 8 years. I went to work that morning and said nothing to anyone. I moved through my shift on autopilot, which is dangerous for a nurse, and I knew it, so I asked to be assigned to lower acuity patients, and I was grateful when my charge nurse didn't ask why. I ate lunch alone. On my break, I texted my best friend Petra. "Can I come over tonight?" She responded within a minute, already ordering pizza. "Come whenever." Petra has known me since college. She's the kind of friend who doesn't perform concern, she just makes space for you and waits. I showed up at her apartment at 9:30 p.m. still in my scrubs, and she handed me a glass of wine without a word, and we sat on her couch, and I played her the voicemail. When it ended, Petra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very carefully, "Iris, how long have you known, somewhere in the back of your mind, that this was happening?" I started to say never. The word didn't make it out. "A while," I said instead. She nodded like that was the answer she expected. "Okay. What do you want to do?" That was the right question. Not what should I do? Not what would a good person do? Not what does your family expect you to do? Just what do you want? I didn't have an answer yet. But for the first time, I was being asked. I didn't make any dramatic moves in the first week. I know that's not how these stories are supposed to go. You're supposed to have the revelation and then immediately transform. That's not what happened. What happened was, I went to work, I came home, I cooked dinner, I didn't return my mother's calls, and I started keeping records. The records were Petra's idea, technically, though she'd gotten it from her friend Lawrence, who worked in financial consulting and had dealt with cases of family financial exploitation before. Document everything, Petra told me. Not because you know what you'll do with it yet, just because documentation is power, and right now they have all of it. So I documented. I went through old bank statements, old texts, old emails. I found the paper trail I'd never thought to look for because I'd never needed to, had never imagined needing to. Each transaction that I'd mentally filed under helping family now looked different on paper. Systematic, timed. There was a rhythm to the requests. They always came within a few weeks of when I received a raise notification at work, which I'd mentioned to my mother each time because I thought good news was meant to be shared with people who loved you. I saw now that she'd been calibrating. I also found something I hadn't been looking for. Going through a box of old paperwork from when I was 26, I found documents related to a small business loan my parents had taken out, a loan I'd known about vaguely but hadn't thought much of. Looking at the documents now, I noticed the co-signer line. My signature was on it. I had never signed that document. I had never seen it before in my life. I sat with that piece of paper for a very long time. Then I called Petra. "I need Lawrence's number," I said. Lawrence turned out to be a quiet man in his 50s who used words precisely and didn't waste any. I met him for coffee on a Thursday afternoon, brought everything I'd compiled, and watched him review it without expression. When he finished, he set the papers down and folded his hands on the table. "The forged signature is the most pressing concern legally," he said, "but the pattern of documented financial exploitation is significant in its own right. You have more options than you probably think." "I don't want to go to war with my family," I said, and I meant it. Even then, with everything I knew, some part of me was still hoping there was a version of this that didn't require burning everything down. Lawrence looked at me steadily. "I understand. But I want you to consider. The war started without you. You're just the last one to find out about it." I thought about that for a long time afterward. Meanwhile, my family's outreach escalated. My mother texted every day. First the casual check-ins, then the more loaded messages, the ones designed to make me feel guilty for my silence. "Just wanted to hear your voice. I guess you're busy." Then my father left a voicemail that wasn't asking for anything specific, just reminding me that family sticks together, and that he hoped I was doing okay. It was the voicemail version of circling. Todd was more direct. He texted, "Mom says you've been weird lately. Everything good?" Then, 3 days later, "Hey, I hate to ask, but I'm in a really rough spot. Could really use some help, maybe 1,000. Would pay you back by next month." I screenshot the text and saved it to my documentation folder. I didn't respond. 2 weeks after finding the forged signature, my parents showed up at my apartment building. I saw them on the intercom camera, my mother in the coat she wore when she wanted to appear respectable, my father standing with his hands in his pockets like he was just casually dropping by. They rang my buzzer 4 times. I didn't answer. Eventually they left. My mother texted, "We're worried about you. Please just let us know you're okay." I typed back, "I'm fine. I'll reach out when I'm ready." Then I turned my phone over and went back to the documentation I'd been working on. Lawrence had connected me with an attorney, a woman named Anne Marie who specialized in financial exploitation cases and had the kind of calm that I imagined came from having seen everything twice. I met with her on a rainy Friday evening. She reviewed the forged signature, the financial records, and the voicemail transcript I'd had prepared. "This is a solid foundation," she said. "The forgery alone is serious. Combined with the documented pattern, you have meaningful legal standing." "What are my options?" I asked. She laid them out. I listened carefully. By the time I left her office, I had a plan. The following Sunday, I asked my parents and Todd to come to my apartment. I told them I needed to talk about some things. I kept the message neutral enough that they agreed without suspicion. My mother texted back with 3 heart emojis, which told me everything about how certain she was of her own position. They arrived together, which I'd expected. My mother brought a casserole dish, which almost undid me. There is something particularly painful about the casserole as a weapon of manipulation, the way it frames the person carrying it as generous and nurturing regardless of what they're actually doing. I set it on the counter and thanked her. We sat in my living room. My laptop was open on the coffee table. Todd was looking at his phone. My father had already started talking about traffic. "I wanted to have this conversation in person," I said. They looked at me. "I've been doing a lot of thinking over the last few weeks. About our family. About the last 8 years. My mother's expression shifted barely, but I knew her face. "Honey, if this is about money, it is," I said. "But not the way you mean." I opened the laptop and turned it to face them. On the screen was the spreadsheet I'd compiled, $63,420 over 8 years, itemized by date and purpose. I'd included the original text messages were available. I'd included the voicemail transcript. I'd included a photograph of the forged signature. The room went very quiet. My father was the first to speak. He laughed, that reflexive, dismissive laugh men use when they're caught and need a second to recalibrate. "Iris, come on. You can't put a price tag on family." "I didn't," I said. "You did. It's right there." Todd stared at the screen. His face had gone through several expressions in quick succession and settled on something that looked almost like genuine shock, which surprised me. Maybe he hadn't understood the scale either. Maybe that was true. I filed it away and kept going. My mother was quiet. That was actually the most frightening thing in the room. My mother choosing not to speak. She was calculating. I told them about Anne-Marie. I told them about the forged signature. And I watched my father's face go careful in a way that confirmed what I'd already known. I told them that I would not be providing any financial assistance going forward, and that any further contact attempting to request such assistance would be forwarded to Anne-Marie's office. I kept my voice even. I'd practiced this part in front of my bathroom mirror for 3 nights running. My mother found her voice eventually. The version she deployed was the wounded one. The trembling register she used when guilt was her best remaining option. I had failed to appreciate everything they'd done for me. I had always been selfish, underneath the surface. She had sacrificed so much, and this was how I repaid her. I let her finish. Then I said, the conversation about the forged signature will happen through our attorneys. I think it's time for you to go. They left. Todd paused at the door and looked back at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Not quite remorse, not quite the usual performance. Just something uncertain. He didn't say anything. He followed our parents out. I closed the door and stood in my hallway for a long moment. The casserole dish was still on my kitchen counter. I put it in the refrigerator because I didn't know what else to do with it. The weeks that followed were ugly in the way that necessary things sometimes are. My mother contacted relatives. I heard from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, some of them sympathetic, some of them relaying my mother's version of events with barely concealed disapproval. My father left a voicemail calling my behavior a betrayal of everything this family stands for, which I also forwarded to Anne-Marie's office. The forged signature was resolved through a legal settlement process I won't detail fully because Anne-Marie advised me not to, but I will say that once it became clear I had the document, the documentation, and the attorney, the conversation changed register entirely. The posture of grievance my parents had adopted crumbled fairly quickly when it met the reality of legal exposure. Through all of it, Petra showed up. Lawrence kept me grounded with his precise, unsentimental way of viewing the situation. Anne-Marie did what Anne-Marie did, and I went to work, came home, cooked dinner, and tried to figure out who I was without the role I'd been cast in for 8 years. That turns out to be the longest part of the process. The legal stuff has a timeline, a resolution, an endpoint. The identity reconstruction doesn't. Some evenings, I'd find myself reaching for my phone to call my mother about something ordinary, some piece of news or a funny thing that happened at work, and the impulse would stop mid-reach when I remembered. Those moments were the loneliest, not because I missed the manipulation, but because I missed the mother I'd believed she was, the one who turned out to have always been partially invented. I talked about it with Lawrence over coffee one afternoon, about 6 months after everything. He'd become something of a quiet, ongoing presence in my life by then, someone I checked in with occasionally when I needed a steady external perspective. The grief is appropriate, he said. You're mourning something that was real to you, even if it was also built on a false foundation. Both of those things can be true at the same time. I wrote that down when I got home. Todd reached out to me privately, about 4 months after the conversation in my apartment. Not a request, just a message that said he'd been thinking and that he was sorry and that he knew sorry wasn't enough but he meant it. He said he'd known things were wrong for a long time and had told himself it was just how the family worked, which he now understood was not an explanation. He said he was in therapy. He said he didn't expect anything from me. I sat with that message for 2 weeks before I responded. I'm still deciding what kind of relationship, if any, is possible with him. That question doesn't have an answer yet. I'd stopped requiring things to have answers before I'm ready for them. What I know now, I don't miss the role. I miss the people I believed were real. Those are different kinds of loss, and they require different kinds of grieving. What I know now, I am not their emergency fund, their pension plan, their vending machine, their backup. I am a person who worked hard for what she has, who loves genuinely, who gives willingly when giving is chosen freely rather than extracted. That person exists. She was always there, underneath the role. She's who I'm getting to know now. Some days I sit in my apartment and look at the rattling radiator. I finally called maintenance, they fixed it, and I think about how long I let things rattle that I had the power to repair. Not as self-criticism, just as information. My mother hasn't spoken to me in 5 months. My father sent a card at Christmas, no message inside, just his signature. like he wasn't sure what he wanted to communicate but wanted to communicate something. I put it in a drawer. Maybe someday I'll know what to do with it. Maybe that day doesn't have to come on any particular schedule. Petra and I got coffee last Saturday at this place near her apartment that does a lavender latte I'd normally find too precious but have become mildly obsessed with. We talked for 3 hours about everything except my family. Her job, my job, a documentary we'd both watched, the trip to Portugal I'm actually booking this time. 14 months of saving, same as before. But different. It's different now. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself after realizing the people who were supposed to know you best had never really been looking? Tell me about it in the comments. I think we have more to say to each other than we know. I think about cause and effect a lot more than I used to, not in a mystical way. I'm not talking about the universe evening some cosmic score. I mean it in the most literal, practical sense. The things we allow teach people what we'll continue to allow. And for 8 years, every time I transferred money without being asked directly, every time I absorbed the guilt and said nothing, every time I told myself that this was what love looked like, I was teaching my family exactly how to treat me. That's not self-blame. That's just the uncomfortable mechanics of how patterns get built. The voicemail was the moment the pattern broke, not because my family suddenly changed. They didn't, not most of them, but because I finally had undeniable 37-second proof of what I'd been slowly sensing for years and choosing not to look at directly. My mother's voice on that recording, relaxed and laughing, calling me her emergency fund. That was just her being honest in a room she thought I wasn't in. The cruelty wasn't new. The only thing that was new was that I heard it clearly. What I've come to understand is that moral clarity, real moral clarity, not the performance of it, requires you to look at the evidence in front of you instead of the story you'd prefer to believe. For a long time, I chose the story. My family needed me. I was the strong one. Helping was what good people did. Those things felt true because I wanted them to be true, and I built my sense of self around them. Giving up the story meant giving up a version of myself I'd been comfortable inside, even if that comfort was costing me everything. That's where the real work is, not the legal process. Anne-Marie handled most of that with quiet efficiency. Not even the confrontation in my living room, which I'd rehearsed so many times it almost felt manageable by the time it happened. The real work was sitting alone in my apartment afterward, with the casserole dish in my refrigerator, and the silence where my family used to be, and figuring out who I was when I wasn't being useful to someone else. That question is harder than any conversation I've ever had. Petra didn't try to answer it for me. Lawrence didn't either. The best thing the people in my corner did was make space for me to stay uncertain, for as long as I needed to. That, I think, is what actual support looks like. Not someone rushing you toward resolution, but someone willing to sit with you in the unresolved middle without flinching. Todd's apology is still something I'm sitting with. I don't have a verdict yet. What I've learned is that I don't need one on anyone else's timeline but my own. That's a form of intelligence I didn't have before. The intelligence to know that my choices about who gets access to me are mine to make. Slowly, deliberately, without owing anyone an explanation. I'm booking Portugal. Same amount, same account, same 14 months of saving. But I'm a different person doing it now. The woman who canceled that trip 8 years ago believed her worth was measured in what she gave up for other people. I know better. Not because someone told me. Because I lived the consequence of not knowing, added it up to $63,000 and decided once was enough. What you repeatedly do with your time, your money, your silence, that becomes the story of your life. I'm the one writing mine now.